Yeah, we've conducted many experiments in our studios, even beyond um, things that we do, in galleries. For example, she took one of my woven sculptures that's both steel and bronze. It's a wrapped wire piece, kind of like a basket that is a shell in geometry. And she put some live plants in it, and it gradually ate away at the steel because it was wet as you water the plant. Can you all see this, my screen now? Is that working? Okay, wonderful. All right, so this is a collection. This is a family of many of the shells that I've made in the last few years. These are repurposed PVC pipes. So in a way, I'll show you the geometry of a logarithmic spiral. So spirals. Let's see. Oh, do I have a logarithm? Okay. Where's the log one? Oh, this is tough. So there are many kinds of spirals. Logarithmic ones are ones that expand more quickly as they progress out from the center. So like many people would know the Fibonacci spiral, this one, where it's a fractal where it expands the width of double itself each time it rotates. So each section is one square larger than the last one. This is a Padovan spiral, which is also a logarithmic spiral, but expands at a different rate. So it's easy to get those kind of mixed up. And people often look at my pieces and think, is that a logarithmic spiral? Or is that a Fibonacci spiral? And it's not, but it's a very closely related mathematical figure. But the thing is, in nature, it's not a linear relationship. The geometries are very parametric, which means that there are so many parameters that scale non-linearly, is the easiest way to put that. So I'm using those in this example to amplify sound. There's actually a speaker inside here. So I'm mimicking the shape of a nautilus or an ammonite, these kind of mollusks that have this shaped shell, but using it to amplify. So it's both a gramophone or a Victrola or like a pipe organ horn and a shell at the same time. I call them shells. There's lots of different ways to describe these pieces. But this is kind of showing a variety and a family chart, a family photo of how these all fit together. So these ones, I call them spires, are stacked. This would also be a parametric spiral because the expansion is nonlinear, but the geometry, they're stacked flat pieces rather than these that spiral around in a different orientation, different axis. And then these other ones, these little wire ones are, I think of them as drawings in space. Speaking of drawings in space, we live in a Milky Way galaxy. It is very common spiral galaxy. They are kind of like in the middle in the history of the universe, and we're talking billions of years old. They're the most common galaxy shape that planets live in. This is a logarithmic spiral. So this is scaling linearly, which is kind of less common in nature. This is a wonderful comic called Uzumaki by Junji Ito, which is about it's kind of a horror story, but it's about spirals and their kind of obsessive qualities and the many different permutations that they come in. So when I'm drawing, I kind of think of growing a shape, growing a form. So I would go through with a black pen first here, kind of free form, keep it generally within the page so it's a figure, so it's a shape, but also very free form and kind of permeable. Very interested in something that's translucent and kind of exists with the world that's through it and around it, being part of it. So this is how my drawings normally start in this series. And I may interpose multiple layers on top of each other to kind of develop this texture, this geometry. And so movement is one of the crucial things to me. I've always been interested in how, if you record the movement of even a simple shape, if it's a circle spinning, that it'll create this really complex and interesting geometry. So you can see the spirals. This is somewhat inspired by roly-polies, but in an even more simplified, linear geometry. Now, one spiral that's in all of us, it's specific to mammals. In the history of animals, our cochlea, which is in our inner ear, it's the microphone basically at the end of our ear canal, is specifically tuned using this spiral shape to understand bass frequencies. So other animals like birds and reptiles, because they don't have a spiral in their ear, they only hear high frequency sounds. And the nifty thing about low frequency sounds is that they can travel long distances. So if you think of the mating call of a rhino or a whale, it travels great distances because it has that low frequency tuning. I'll show you a more detailed image of that later. This was from a sketchbook that living in Florida, you know, it rains a lot. If you're in there, you know how the summer rains and how consistent they are. So I was out with my sketchbook, you know, trying to draw as always, and I got rained on. And when my book got wet and I put it back together, I got this incredible mold growth that I later sprayed so it was sealed and everything. But it's something that I could never thought of drawing on my own. There's something about the complexity of the natural world. You know, I'm using the word natural in the most broad sense. It's really the world that we live in. Like, there's no unnatural world. The architecture that we live in is part of nature. We are part of nature. We are animals, we're primates. We can't really get around that. And so we have to think about our relationship with the world that we're part of. Let's see. So this was a drawing that, again, because of the growth, became so much more interesting to me. I mean, it's a relatively simple drawing, but the complexity of that transparent, translucent color layering really took it to the next level. And this is somewhere between a cloud that you can see through and a bug that is right in front of you. I take a lot of inspiration from bugs also. I mean, Florida, talk about cockroaches. I didn't include any in this series of slides, but they're very important. Let's just leave it there. So when I've been doing some of the renderings, I will laser cut. Let me see if I have that image clearly. I'll use the geometry to laser cut a profile or a stencil and then use it to draw with. Here we go. So it's part of the reason I'm interested in bugs is that they use kind of iterative design. They reproduce at such incredible rates that they can't help but mutate, and they live such short lives. They can't help but mutate to the environment that they live in and form more complex interactions with every form of life around them. So this is getting more mathematical. This is where I'm trying to boil this very complex Nautilus geometry down to a series of hexagons. Hexagons because they're only six-sided. It's a very simple, you know, think of honeycomb, more insects. It's multi-sided, but simple enough that it doesn't break the computer. You know, it's very recognizable by humans. The edges are very sharp and clean, and so it's a very relatable shape, and that you can understand the geometry despite its complexity. And this is going into those shapes, and this is again considering the translucency and the transparency of these shapes. Let's see, let's go in the other direction. Move on to some sculptures. So we're just some paintings. Iggy fonts actually got me into how paint drips and the complex fluid interactions that fluids have. He taught me, I think Andrea's got this piece behind her. This is the beginning of that painting that Andrea and B has behind her. So I would work this flat. I would do a basic drawing and then lay it flat and paint on top of it, a little bit of Jack Pollock, get the kind of drip textures and the complex fluids on top of it, and then choose areas to develop, you know, to push forward and pull back. These paintings, you know, I try to make them concise and fluid, but also it takes layers and layers to develop this kind of layering of strata when I'm working on these paintings. And then, you know, kind of sand back into them so that they blend together and become, I've always been interested in rust, something about the relationship with the world around us and the architecture that we think is permanent, but steel, of course, is not. And water, you know, in the periods of hundreds of years, eats right through it. And so I'll work back into a painting, you know, for weeks and months to get it to be this rich. This is the beginning of, so I did a 3D model, a 3D rendering, and projected it onto this canvas, traced it, and then did some very light filling here before I laid it flat, and then started painting it. Let me see if I have, this is the final painting from that one. So you have the basic geometry and then the rich relationship with the kind of starscape around it. And this is also using a laser cut shell that I had rendered, laying it flat and then painting, using it as a stencil. And this is Mylar. So if you put this up against a window, it would shine through the clear areas. Much like a snail lives inside its shell. Without the snail, it's a hollow vessel. So these are kind of drawings in space inspired by snail shells. So I take a bit of wire, wrap it flat into a coil, grab the middle of the coil, and then kind of pull it out and twist it into this shape. It's a very quick way of getting this kind of contouring, complex shape. And then I'll go back over it like basket weaving with some copper wire and add this. So this is the kind of shell that with Emmeline, we melted through the steel because of the watering of the plant, and the copper, because copper is water resistant and rust resistant, held up. So we learned the relationship between what can be a useful plant vessel and what cannot. Emmeline was also nannying this family, and I think it was an 11-year-old that she was taking care of, saw one of my sculptures and asked, "Is it alive?" Which was one of the most inspiring things I'd heard about my work in quite a while. It really made me rethink why I started making this work and what I'd like to do with it. This is based on a pill bug, which is apparently also, it's a crustacean and not an insect, which I learned recently. They're kind of bioremediators that break down the garbage in the soil into useful soil. So the cochlea, this is one of the first Nautilus shell designs that I did using water. When you're designing a concert hall, architects often use a ripple tank to demonstrate how sound propagates through a space. And so I imagine that this was, say, a miniature concert hall, and this would be where the performer or the sound point is originating, and then the sound would echo through this whole shape. So you may have heard of a whispering gallery. It's when you whisper on a curved wall, and that curved shape, like a lens, will focus the sound or the light. And so you can see that the sound is being focused right here because of this curved shape. And so I was trying to integrate sound, because I played in this punk rock band in high school. I was like, how can I take music and geometry and sculpture and make it into one thing? I was studying at University of Florida for sculpture and music, and I never had enough time to do both. The projects were it was too intense. I wanted to do too much in all these classes. And so I talked to all my professors and I asked them, if I make one form, a sculpture that has sound in it, will that work for your class? And they said yes. So I started doing research into what shapes would affect sound in a useful way. And that's one of the ways that I found the spiral or the shell. And then I later connected that to how mammals have spiral cochlea and realized, okay, I'm really onto something. I wish you were all here in person. I decided not to do it over Zoom because sound is very difficult. But when you hear the sound through the shell, it amplifies it in this way that is difficult to describe. It is like a concert hall. It resonates and adds reverb that you wouldn't get just through a regular speaker. It adds character and depth and space to the sound. Let me see. So these are some of the cockroach pieces that I mentioned, this little guy right here. And so I started making these spiral shapes after, first being interested in nature in itself. And then I was like, how can I make this shape? What are the different ways I can do it? So making the wireframes was kind of the next step in that process. And then, doing these kind of bone-like layers on top of the wire. And then I started thinking, what if I made a solid skin and then put a speaker in it? So it's been kind of a piece by piece development. This is Emmeline in her studio. She's really the one who found the idea of EcoAge, and I've been one of her main collaborators since then. This is the sheet of bark that we found together in Vermont that now lives with one of my cousins. It's had quite a journey. This is one of the wooden pieces that I worked on when I was at the Vermont Studio Center in their wood shop. I was just finding pieces of wood and sticks and finding ways to make a spiral shape using just a stick. This is one of the collaborative pieces Emmeline and I did. So this is stainless steel after we learned our lesson about steel. So we welded a stainless steel frame. The skin here is the plastic bags. And then, Emmeline, I don't even know what plant this is, but it's really cute in there. This is the first scale model that she did, a maquette of what our installations would look like. For one of my sculptures, she just used a regular snail shell. And she does drawings on receipt paper. So it's really about recycling the detritus that we create as a society and kind of selling it back to us, making us kind of engage with the trash that we create. This is the piece that I've been talking about so much. It's full of moss. And the big loops are steel wire, and then these small bands running along the spines are copper wire. So the steel rusted through in this beautiful way. Here's another planter piece we did together with a Swiss cheese plant in it. So that's also a steel frame inside with a plastic bag skin. And so when I really started to get the hang of taking these nautilus or spiral shell geometries and trying to construct them, I thought of slicing them into layers and then laser cutting those and then stacking them together. This is one of the first pieces I did that has a speaker inside. So this little black wire goes to a tiny little speaker. And this thing is only about 10 inches across, but the sound of it is very impressive. This is one way of doing where I'm slicing layers and stacking them. This is one where I'm slicing sheets and then folding them together. It's kind of a topological study, which is the mathematics of surfaces and skins. This is the same thing. So I was experimenting with hexagons versus octagons here. I wanted to find which one would be more interesting or more useful to work with. I decided on hexagons because in this shape, at this angle, they can sit straight up. They have a flat bottom like this, which has been very helpful for how they interact with the real world. If I'm doing an installation somewhere, I can easily sit them on the ground and they can do their thing. The other way I like to show these pieces is hanging from the ceiling or from, in this case, a tree. This is an installation I did with Emmeline for EcoAge at a music event called Destination Moon, which is a solar-powered music festival. We did a whole installation outside where people could lay down and listen to the songs they were playing of birds and the ocean. I like to play wave sounds, a lot of natural sounds through these. This is one of the stacked pieces, so it has a steel spine running through the whole thing, it has a vertebra, a column. And then these stacks of hexagons, I just twisted and rotated to get this. I didn't have to sit there and running the numbers, I just did it by hand, which is another wonderful way to make these kind of complex shapes. So this is a wooden hexagon spine. So I can always play with the parametric geometry. You can play with the length versus the width versus the number of sides that these polygons have. So a circle is basically an infinite-sided polygon. So these are circles. This is another hexagon one made of plexiglass. It's one of the first ones I did that had a speaker on it that was this laser cut spine design or spire design. So this whole thing is hollow and the sound is playing through this little speaker and bouncing around all the way out and it comes out on this end. Then I started playing with tubes. So this is kind of like a Archimedean spiral where the width stays the same. It's much like a tube, but by coiling it in like this, you get the length of that tube. So if you unroll this, it'd be about 10 feet long. But because it's coiled in on itself, and that's why our cochlea is so powerful, the length of the tube determines how low the frequency it's going to resonate with. So this has a small subwoofer inside it, but because of this long tube, it has this booming depth that again, trying to explore how these things could look alive. This is how the the spire sculptures can nestle together. This is something I was doing when I was experimenting with wood at the Vermont Studio Center and during another residency that summer. Really trying to explore the scraps of wood in the wood shop and how if you look at them, close enough and put them up on the wall, they're really, they're sculptures on their own. They have so much history and texture and detail. So this is what these shells would look like unrolled. So I'm using the math and the software I'm using called Rhinoceros to take the geometry that I've rendered, unroll it, and then laser cut that so I can stack them up together. I can show you this guy in a minute. I'll hold it in front of the camera and twist it around. This is a wooden, layered nautilus. So I'm taking a circular geometry and slicing with a series of planes and then laser cutting those and stacking them together. This is one of the first drawings I did, imagining what it would be like to have a speaker inside our cochlea-shaped form. And then this is a frequency chart of our cochlea. So the entrance of the cochlea, the sound comes in here. It goes through your ear canal to your eardrum, and then it starts through this spiral. So this is a fluid-filled coil that in the beginning detects all the high frequencies. So that's why when you have hearing loss, it starts with the high-pitched sounds. And as it goes through and through, it filters out the high-frequency sounds and selects for the bassy or low-pitched sounds. Again, experimenting with what a speaker would look like inside our cochlea. So these shells, because they can play sound through them, are a platform for sonic collaboration. I have musicians and performance artists play through the shells live. This is our friend Aaron, who's doing a baptism performance at this wonderful oceanfront space in Brooklyn. And our friend Scene is playing guitar here. And then our friend off camera here, Davey, is playing the sounds of seals and the deep ocean through the shells that I have here. So there's no other speakers other than the shells that I had in the room. This is my friend Micah playing in my studio. So this is actually the table that I'm on right now. And Micah's here with their whole sound setup, and they're playing through 6 of these shells at the same time. And so the size of the shell also determines the pitch of it. So the smaller ones, like this one over here, is better for high frequency sounds, and the bigger ones are tuned, they're like subwoofers, where they're tuned for lower and bassier sounds. This is my friend Jen Grossman using a microphone, a wireless microphone, to play feedback through the shell and then through the whole series of shells in the room. This is during a Bushwick Open Studios in our neighborhood, where we had dozens of artists come and play through the shells for a live audience of studio visitors. And up here at the top, you can see an Eco-Age Emmeline collaboration, one of my shells with a pothos plant living in it. And then Emmeline's ferns in the back. 1 second, I'm gonna get some water. Ooh, this is my friend Quinton Stickley and Crow playing cello on the right here. They came over for a little studio collaborative jam session. They're both incredibly talented. I'll have to post their stuff and links to their work soon. And so I have my computer here running live connections to their instruments, their microphone, and their cello here playing through the shells as well. And then this is for a recent proposal where I was using the geometry, the mathing rendering software I use to basically explode one of the shell shapes. And imagine if each of the lines of the edges was continued endlessly, infinitely into space. And then taking that, I boiled it down to, I simplified it then. I'll show you the animation. I simplified it to the spiral shape, the nautilus. So what I'm doing is I'm graphing the length of the lines to a slider and then shortening them, simplifying them down to a point on this final curve. So that's what I did was I took this final shape and worked backwards and gradually exploded it and took each of the settings or the information, the data for each of these points, the length of the line, the relationship to its final destination, and skewed it and used math to explode that shape. Let's see, this is one of the first ones. Oh, I should show you the exploded one. The first time I tried to make a tube, a spiral shell that worked with sound, it didn't work. It was full of holes, and just when I thought I was going to get beautiful sound through it, it totally didn't work. I couldn't fill all the tiny little holes on it. You need to have a sealed spiral tube. So I took a plasma torch and I shredded it, and I was very interested in the results, but it wasn't until I started thinking more tubular with this piece, until I put a subwoofer on a sealed tube and really understood how bassy, how much this geometry can amplify and change the quality of a sound. This is a laser cone. I started thinking about museum stands and how, in a museum you're studying specimens and you need to see it, elevated. So I started making these stands in order to highlight their shape and geometry. So since they're fractals and I'm interested in iterative design like insects, I made a series of these that scale. So each of them is slightly different size. This is one of them hanging from a venue called Hollow, hanging from the ceiling, and has a small subwoofer in here. And our friends play live through this as well. This is exploring parametric geometry with hexagons. And so I was really interested in how you can get these sweeping curves, much like my original drawings, using nothing but a simple shape and rotating it. And this is the final shape that I used for that rendering. And here I am in upstate New York, where I brought this shell. It's really nice with this specific one because the skin is so thin. It works for sound because it's sealed, but because it's a lightweight plywood, this thing only weighs like 6 pounds and works well for sound. There you go. That's my chat.